From Washington, this is the Macrocast with Hamilton Place Strategies and Markets Policy Partners.
Good morning. You're listening to the Macrocast, brought to you by Hamilton Place Strategies and Markets Policy Partners. Great to be. It's another fascinating week. We had a ton of Fed speak this week, which we're going to get to in a little while. But this is Tony Fratto back in New York City this week. John Fagan is off this week. Brendan Walsh is here from Markets Policy Partners. And we're really lucky to have Ben Koltun with us today, too. Ben is Director of Research at Beacon Policy Advisors and a great friend to HBS and a former staffer at HBS. So it's like family coming home. Ben, welcome to the show, first of all. Great. Yeah, really, really great to have you on. And Ben wrote some work in one of Beacon's policy notes about reconciliation. And it's like one of those topics with everything going on in the world right now that we haven't spent a lot of time on, but want to get a sense from Ben on how he sees that coming together. Joe Manchin once again at the linchpin, which is kind of obviously a reoccurring theme. We want to get into that with Ben right now, but before we get into that with Ben, Brendan, you were at the Masters.
Yeah, it was back to normal.
Tiger yesterday.
I saw him on Wednesday. We followed him around. He played with Justin Thomas and Freddie Couples in his.
That must have been a great round. What a great grouping.
Yeah, that was really cool. It was also nice because you could still see him, but also he took up probably a third of the patrons, so you could walk around the rest of the course and kind of have it to yourself.
Well, he had a hell of a round yesterday. It was good to see him. He shot a 71 yesterday. He's right there. I don't know when he tees off today, but
so he's in the afternoon today. Yep.
He is in the afternoon. Yeah. Hey, look, all of us who have to work during the week and don't get to take off and go to the Masters and don't get to watch the Masters because we're working. The only thing we want is, I don't care what he shoots today as long as it gets him to the weekend. We want Tiger to get to the weekend.
The Tiger's never missed I guess the second time he played it when he was 19 years old, he missed the cut. But since then, he's never missed it. So if Tiger was confident enough to come up and play, he knows he's making the weekend.
Well, it'll be good. It'll be great if we get to watch that this weekend.
And it is fascinating, especially on a practice round, because, you hit a bunch of balls. But the biggest thing is once they get up to the hole, they put the caddies put discs out where the holes are going to be on the 4 days.
Yep.
And what they do is they practice their misses. So they go into the bunker, or they go to the worst outcome, and then try to par out from there.
I love the practice rounds, and I have to say I'm much more of a U.S. Open guy. I love the Open Championship. I love the tougher. I know everybody loves Augusta, but come on, I like the St. Jude Classic is a tougher track than Augusta. And it's just like we never get reactions like that on our show. Like people start leaving comments on our
that'll definitely get a comment.
But just look at the scores, right? The scores are always double digit under par scores to win, and it's just so it's not. I know it's beautiful. I know the tradition. I know the history, but I'm a U.S. Open guy, and so I've been to a bunch of U.S. Opens and love them. But I always try whenever I can to go to practice rounds. I've seen 3 different U.S. Opens at Oakmont, in Pittsburgh, and Congressional, and a few other places. They're so much fun, right? And there's you get to see these guys working without the pressure of putting a score in the book, and it's great to see them work.
In terms of so I went with Matt Delafano, who has been on the podcast another time, and he's kind of a logistics engineering kind of guy. So he was geeking out just how well the event is run. A line looks like it's going to be a half hour to get in the bathroom, and it's 4 minutes. All the concession stands, you're in and out in 2 minutes, and they don't charge you anything. Well, for the clothes, they charge you a good rate. But for
attendance
else,
is so much. But they keep attendance in check. The other events are much bigger. But all right, that's all for golf. Hopefully, it'd be great if we have something good to talk about next week. If it's a good Tiger finish,
exactly.
Yeah, Ben Koltun, welcome to the Macrocast. I was almost like when I saw your note on reconciliation, I was like, oh, I haven't heard anybody talk about reconciliation in 2 weeks, and like, when we can get Ben on to talk about it and get us an update. How are you? Talk to us about how you're seeing things right now, especially after we just got through the Senate in session for about 6 consecutive 6 weeks. It was a very long session for the Senate. And how are you? But how do you see the rest of the year? And what's your sense of confidence on whether they do or do not get anything done in reconciliation?
Yeah, I mean, reconciliation was once called in former day Build Back Better. It was known as BBB.
Yeah, it's
also known these days as another 3-letter initial, which is RIP. But reconciliation in general, I think it's TBD. And being a former HPSer, I know never to bury the lead. So I'm going to say up front, I'm bullish that Democrats will pass something by the August recess. And I guess the main reason why is this: I believe most Democrats have gone through, or they're at least in the process of going through, their stages of legislative grief to accept a Joe Manchinized version of reconciliation. And just like taking a step back for like how we got here and kind of the mess that Democrats seem to be in, is just the original sin that caused BBB to derail was just an underestimation by Democratic leadership of the difficulty of managing a split Senate. I don't think people realize how crazy a split Senate is, and the weird dynamics that can come up, like having 2 President Joes of Biden and Manchin. And it's kind of this current split Senate is the longest ever in history. And in the past, they usually dissolve from defections or deaths. And so good party leadership, they can reliably get 95% of the rank and file in line for votes. And that's usually sufficient for majorities, but just that's not the case in a split Senate or a House with 4 votes to spare. It's those idiosyncrasies for members that kind of matter. And even though politics has become more nationalized, there are still kind of regional or personal idiosyncrasies. And so I think like today, Democrats are finally accepting the premise that a West Virginia Democrat has real differences from the national Democratic brand. And the same goes for kind of a kind of classic Arizona Democrat. So they're doing kind of one of these high school math optimization problems, try to maximize spending in reconciliation, given the constraints of Manchin and Senator Kyrsten Sinema. And so we've seen, Manchin kind of re-engaging. I mean, he's kind of aloof, but he's also been saying things, and that he wants to do reconciliation as it was originally intended to do when it was created in the 1970s, which is to decrease the deficit. So $2 in offsets for $1 in spending. He doesn't want to do social spending, keep that to kind of regular order. And he wants everything to be made permanent and not be a temporary gimmick. And then for Sinema, she wants the universe of offsets to be from the House passed Build Back Better, where Democrats actually worked with her to appeal to her demands. And there were about like $2.1 trillion in offsets, but realistically whittling it down because of maybe it's not a parliamentarian or just some other kind of carve-outs, can say that maybe there's sensibly $1.75 trillion to $2 trillion in offsets that are available in a reconciliation package. So that's a maximum of $875 billion to $1 trillion in spending. So I guess the big question that I have is there enough agreement on the offsets between Manchin and Sinema? And there's some real philosophical differences on raising rates for Manchin and the extent of drug pricing versus Sinema, who doesn't want to raise rates. But I think there is. There's many ways to get to like $1 trillion in offsets that I believe can get both Manchin and Sinema. I mean, for one, there's the House passed drug pricing measures and the IRS reforms that I think are both acceptable to both.
Let's talk. List those out, Ben. Like on what you think. Let's just start with offsets. I'm going to ask you about composition also, but tell us what revenue you think they could be working with.
So, I mean, if you want to go, kind of what's the lowest common denominator here? Yeah. Joe Manchin last July, he released, he had this secret deal with Chuck Schumer about like a $1.5 trillion deal that he'd accept, and there was $1.5 trillion in offsets. And what is that overlapping with the House Build Back Better? There are a couple of things that are overlapping. There is the IRS reforms closing the tax gap. There's drug pricing measures, and there's the corporate minimum tax of 15%. So I think the drug pricing measures, I mean, that's a lot of times offsets are means and ends, but the drug pricing measures, they're an ends unto itself. And there was about $250 billion that got kind of the okay from Sinema, who's a pro-pharma Democrat. And then the IRS closing the tax gap, so increasing funding for IRS for greater enforcement. That was scored as raising, I think, $127 billion. Although the Treasury was saying it's actually $320 billion. So that's right there. That's $377 billion to $570 billion. And so they need, to get to $1 trillion. And so what are the least controversial things here? And Build Back Better, there wasn't hardly a peep with the 3.8% net investment income tax for all active income and making excess business losses loss limit permanent. Those two were about $412 billion. I think the administration really wants to try to get the OECD G20 tax deal implemented in the United States, and so Pillar 2, which is the 15% global minimum tax, they want the United States to be compliant in that. There's a lot of issues in trying to get the deal fully implemented, but there was a real push to kind of raise the rates and kind of make it compliant in the United States. And I think that's something that Democrats can kind of get around, at least to some extent. And then there's things like the adjusted gross income surtax. It was 5% and 8% for different levels that was in Build Back Better. And it's not quite like raising the rates, but I think there's something that can be added. Maybe there's some further carve outs for pass-throughs or things like that. But again, I think from there, you're really getting to kind of $1 trillion. And it's not quite what like Manchin is putting forward of raising the corporate tax rates, of ending carried interest, and of raising capital gains rates. But I still think that it's something that I think his biggest concern is he wants to decrease the deficit. And so if he gets that 2-to-1 offsets to spending through this sort of revenue, I think that's something that he'd be okay with.
So then at best you're looking at, really maybe $500 or $600 million of new spending in that case, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, Joe Manchin isn't part of the Senate Finance Committee. And so, he in his July deal with Schumer, he was saying, let's do a 15% domestic corporate minimum tax. Yeah. And that's what Democrats actually did. They did the 15% minimum book tax, but kind of there's rumblings that Manchin is
a stupid tax, but go
yeah. On. I mean, there's rumblings that Manchin is kind of has some problems with it. And I mean, there's obvious reasons. It's very complicated and like there's a lot of carve outs. So even though it's something that he proposed, you can kind of see that he has this like theoretical or like philosophical view of taxes, but when you kind of get to the lobbying and kind of the nuts and bolts, there may be some pushback. So like you were saying, it could be the top level could be 500, 600 billion. I'm not completely offsetting the idea that it could maybe go up to 800 billion or something like that.
Yeah, I can imagine that too. But so what would that be spent on then? Tell me the piece. Yeah, tell me the pieces that you think that if they were to get that revenue, what are they spending it on? What ends up in it?
So it's certainly there's going to be a climate and energy report part. I think that's the number one spending area.
It's a must title, right? Is like
it's what Manchin. He's the chair of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. It's something that he is interested in of climate energy. It's something that the Finance Committee Chair Ron Wyden has worked closely with Manchin on. And Manchin being from a coal state and supportive of fossil fuels in many ways, he has indicated being okay with some sort of all of the above climate energy plan. And so there's $555 billion in Build Back Better for climate and energy. It's going to change. Manchin has been pretty skeptical of late of kind of bolstering electric vehicles for consumers, but I think a lot of the tax credits, the investment tax credits, the production tax credits for clean energy, and making sure that nuclear and hydrogen are part of the equation, as well as clean coal for Manchin. I think that's something that he can certainly rally around. And so I think they were talking even up to $500 billion. And so I think it's very plausible that you can get something in that range, minus some of the electric vehicles. And so that's the bulk of it. And that may be the only thing that Joe Manchin agrees to. I think there is a possibility for healthcare. I mean, it's just healthcare is just one of those things that you just can't do through regular order these days. I mean, the ACA was reconciliation, repeal and replace by Republicans was reconciliation. It's being a West Virginian, I mean, it's a big vote. Like Robert Byrd was a big supporter of the ACA. That was Biden, or that was Manchin's predecessor. And so something like the ACA subsidies or the closing the Medicaid gap. So the ACA subsidies, if they were made permanent, because they expire this year, it would be around $220 billion. And the Medicaid gap would be $180 billion. So that's not necessarily cheap, but I mean, there are ways you can kind of finagle that into something that meets kind of the constraints for Manchin and Sinema.
So I get a feeling. Look, I mean, I agree with you on that composition, and I have a hard time seeing how you can get the spending down to Manchin's 2-to-1 ratio. I think the best you could do is pay for it with that revenue if they're lucky enough to get it. But I'll say this, like something every time I go through it, and I talk to other people and we go through it, and then I say, does this still get through the House? Like I know it got through the House last time. Does this still get through the House without losing 4 Democrats?
Yeah, right. I think they do. I think like if that Manchinema nexus can be reached, it's about selling the rest of the caucus. And again, I think most progressives are going through the stages of grief on their long cherished policy goals and Build Back Better. It was 10 years since they last had unified control of government, and who knows? I mean, the next time they have unified control of government, a lot of these people won't be around anymore. And so it's just. They had this hope when they had a unified control that they could get all this done, and they're kind of realizing that not the case. And so can they kind of go through those stages of grief? And I just never underestimate the power of shifting the goalpost in politics and declaring victory in the face of defeat.
I don't either. I could definitely look. I could see it's, but clearly it's what should have been done a long time ago. And I mean, like when you said, I didn't want to interrupt you earlier, but you said, they didn't, it took them a while to come to the realization. I don't think there was, if you talk to leadership in the House or the Senate, especially the Senate, they were under no illusions that the sort of fever dreams on Build Back Better is not something that was going to get done, and we're always going to have the filter of Manchin and Sinema to deal with, and they recognize it really early. But you cannot bail on the progressive wing early, right? They had to show that there was a fight, and they were going to try to do it and try to do everything, and so in a way, like I completely understand the party dynamics of having to fight and to show the progressive wing that you did try. And so that failure is the last thing, not the first thing. But from a broader macro political standpoint, wow, it's awful, right? It's like you've had a year of failure. It's like week after week, not doing the thing you say is the most important thing to do, week after week after week after week of saying we're going to try, and the votes aren't there, and Manchin's not there, and what about Sinema, and maybe if we shrink it, and maybe if we shrink it again, right? You know what I mean? It's like reinforcing failure over and over and over, week after week, just so that the most progressive wing of the party will not beat you up for bailing early. And so, but voters out there, this is all they've heard is that, the Democrats keep failing.
Yeah, I think I agree that, leadership, they knew they had to come to a compromise, but I think they just had rose-colored glasses because Democratic leadership, they asked for $1.9 trillion in the American Rescue Plan. That was their first reconciliation bill, and they got 50 votes in the Senate for a $1.9 trillion bill in the second shortest time to complete a reconciliation bill ever. So I think they had reason to believe they could kind of lead the way on a transformative and popular Build Back Better and get everyone to fall in line. But I think it was a little too cute of how they kind of finagled the making kind of the provisions temporary but arguing that this was actually deficit neutral. And it just look, I mean, if the Republicans had the same majority that Democrats do today, they wouldn't be able to pass Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or at least they wouldn't be able to they would have had to keep the SALT deduction to satisfy the dozen Northeast Republicans who voted against it. Yes. And I just, Pelosi is, I don't think people underestimate her power. And Schumer, he's very much like he talks to everyone in the caucus, but I don't think people were prepared for how difficult it is to kind of, even with the best of leadership, to kind of wrangle all those votes with such narrow margins. And I think it was just like they felt like, they could get there if they just pushed a little harder. And it was clear like the split Senate and this narrow House majority wasn't going to give.
So you think it'll come down to the wire in August to try to get this done before recess, have something that these guys can then go home and campaign on? Reasonably, the August recess is the deadline. I mean, technically the deadline is when the FY22 budget resolution becomes inactive, when FY23 begins in October, but you don't get something like reconciliation done after recess and before the midterm elections. I know there's like talk of maybe doing this by Memorial Day, and I'm not saying that's not possible, but we think we've been through. I think Memorial Day was a deadline from last year, and so here we are for this Memorial Day, and so it's just like I think that Manchin seems to be re-engaging, and after having a lot of the must-pass legislation with appropriations, and now having kind of now Justice Brown Jackson in place, I think that you can turn more to reconciliation, but there's still a lot of angst and a lot of kind of dashed policy dreams that have to be kind of realized for Democrats to kind of finally come to an agreement. And I'm not sure they can do that by Memorial Day, but I think they can do that by the August recess. Yeah, I think you're right. Hey, why don't we take a break here? That was we had Ben Koltun with us from Beacon Policy Advisors. You can also find Ben on Twitter. He's at Ben_Koltun, KOLTUN. Definitely look for him. Ben, stick around with us for next segment. We're talking a little Fed and inflation, and so please stick with us for that. You're listening to the Macrocast.
Markets Policy Partners provides sophisticated financial market analysis that is independent, accessible, and actionable for a broad audience. Learn more at marketspolicy.com or visit them on Twitter at marketspolicy.
I'm back on the Macrocast. Ben Koltun from Beacon Policy Advisors with us. Brendan Walsh from Markets Policy Partners, as always, our co-host of the show. John Fagan is not with us today. He's taking a break today, which is...
Yep. We do it every week, so sometimes you can take a day off.
Brendan, while you were, running around the Masters this week, Fed governors were out talking, all over. Brainerd kicked it off. Mm-hmm. And Powell last week, but Brainerd really, in her speech, if there was any question as to where the Fed was going to be, the signal they were sending about, rates and the balance sheet, she made it crystal clear, didn't she?
Yeah, and she's definitely one of the handful that you want to pay attention to, especially following up on Powell from last week. She really locked it down. And then I also think that the minutes on Wednesday even more reinforced that. The minutes do recap what happened in the meeting, but they write the minutes so they can emphasize things more and less. So I think it's pretty clear that the Fed is taking this opportunity where markets, the equities have rebounded and the volatility has stabilized. Actually, we're not really looking at an inverted yield curve like we were last week as much. To take this opportunity to try to do, I think two things are big on their to-do list. One, really start to aggressively reduce the size of the balance sheet. And two, I think they really would like to do this 50 basis point at the next meeting.
Yeah, it seems pretty clear on the 50 basis points that actually I think both are being pretty clear right now. I think Lael Brainerd made that very, very clear. But even Bullard yesterday, I think he felt, and the comments we've heard from others, Charles Evans, and I can't remember who else was out, but the
Evans is another one you really want to listen to, and he was much more hawkish than his previous, 3-4 months. But,
he's not a voting
No.
number right now, but you still want to listen to him because I think he does have a good sense of where he is a good voice for the board. But the sense we got was, had the Russia invasion not happened and the shock, there absolutely would have been a 50 basis point increase in the policy rate last time. And so I think that's pretty clear. I don't think Lael Brainerd was reinforcing that, but also she focused a great deal on the balance sheet and the sort of rapid movement, much more rapid, I think, than people had been thinking on reducing the size of the balance sheet. So they're going to attack it both ways, which makes sense. But and they're not leaving any doubt in markets. So like if we see a 50 basis point increase next time, and I think you're right, no one should be surprised by that. Are we seeing it in expectations? Is that being priced in a 50 basis point, or is it too early?
No, we're pretty much there at this point. Yeah. I believe it's about 40 basis points, which means it's 50 basis points.
It's 50. Yeah. Is there anything you can...
And the market seems to be taking... But also we've talked a lot about inflation, and obviously high inflation does justify raising rates, especially off of zero. But the rest of the economy, especially the employment situation, we just had jobless claims. It was the lowest level of jobless claims basically ever. The economy, especially if you need a job, there's a lot of people that are willing to hire you right now. Yeah.
By the way, I didn't go back and look at the size of the labor force back in 1968.
Right.
But remember that, like, the last time that we had weekly jobless claims in the range of 165,000 new claims was in the late 1960s, and the size of the labor force was considerably smaller than
it was almost half. Also because women hadn't fully entered the labor force in the 60s.
Exactly. So it's an even more impressive number than
exactly.
Think, right?
Yeah, we don't adjust that for population. We just because in the end it is an economic data point, but really it is a bunch of checks that get sent out because you're unemployed.
Yeah, so you're right. I think we seem to be pretty tight. The last jobs, payroll, non-farm payrolls report showed that job creation is continuing apace. We're not seeing any evidence of that tailing off going forward. So I think you're right. And this is something that I think Bullard emphasized yesterday as well, was there's just a very strong belief that they believe that the economy is in a strong enough place. There is enough economic activity that they will just be taking the froth off the economy, not pushing it. But that said, like, inflation fears are rising, not shrinking. People, right. There isn't a lot of confidence that they can land it easily.
But I do think this week had some interesting data points that can make the Fed feel a little more confident. So the Manheim Index measures used car prices. And for the first time, really since the pandemic began, it's down. So it's down 3.4% on the latest print. Used car prices have been an enormous contributor to the overall inflation rate, especially because we seasonally adjust things, and used car prices always go down. So when they go up, it kind of it almost gets double counted. So now there are a lot of indications in the last month or so that a lot of the big goods producing contributors to the CPI and PCE are starting to have moderated and actually starting to reverse. That can give the Fed a lot of confidence. That's not enough to reach their 2 to 3% target, but it's enough to lower the monthly increases to more normal, 0.3 rather than the 0.5 and 0.7s that they've been having. And that can give them a more confidence that they're not actually pushing the economy into recession. They don't have to be so aggressive to push the economy into recession in order to tame inflation.
Yeah, it's a really and we have to have a lot of faith in that story, yes. Right? Yeah. Like, you have to have faith in the supply chain problems and what's happening with demand, because otherwise, if you just do a sort of a machine calculus, the only way you can tame inflation is if you get the policy rate higher than inflation. So you got to get, so we have to push the
We're not even close
policy
to that.
rate to 7. Yeah, we need interest rates up above 7 or 8%, which isn't going to happen. But it looks a lot to people who were alive at that time, counting myself, looks like it looks to them like the Fed is chasing inflation, not getting out in front of it and curbing inflation. And so it looks like they're always behind where inflation is. And that's why, but you have to have faith that these other factors, whether it's, taming of energy prices, things like used cars, shift from goods to services, and supply chain disruptions easing, all of those things conspiring with, some action on monetary policy to get it in a rate so that they're not chasing.
Yeah, and while monetary policy is lagging because higher rates, a business, if you're going to make a large investment into a factory, that's a big long-term decision, and slightly higher rates is probably not going to preclude you, but maybe in 2 years you're not going to do it because of higher rates. One aspect that it does kind of have the first effect is the housing market. So the 30-year Treasury is now over 5%, where last February was 2.3%. And we're seeing, so Redfin, the online data point, they've saw in the last 2 weeks sellers dropping their prices. That's the first time in a long time that's happened. And housing obviously has been it's been a boomtown for the last 2 years and a large contributor to the overall inflation. So that is a clear effect that, higher rates do slow activity and can, put a dampen on prices.
Well, that's what we hope to see, right? We'll see whether we have evidence of that in the next couple months. I mean,
right. But a lot of the big banks, their economists are now starting to call for recessions in 2023. So going back to your point, the mood out there is still very pessimistic. Yeah. Consumers, when you ask them, are you upset about inflation? And a lot of the experts don't have faith that the Fed can land this thing.
I feel like we are more optimistic than the banks. And are we smarter than the banks, Brendan?
I don't know, but I don't know. I just
I
just think that the U.S. economy is more dynamic than
Ben. Are you?
I mean, for me, I think like Jay Powell, Chairman Powell, he's such a savvy operator in D.C. and there's a reason. There was a Gallup poll from December that had the Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts as having the highest approval rating for a federal leader, and this followed by Jay Powell as Fed chief. Yep. And there's a reason why Powell is so popular. Like he's not like an intellectual powerhouse like Larry Summers, who's going to trailblaze a New York contrarian path, but he just has instills a lot of confidence for people in DC, and we trust him. I trust him, and he's a big collaborator, but he also it sometimes seems like there's a nimbleness there, but the question is is the Fed behind the curve? And it seems like they're priming. Brainerd's speech I think was notable of making the progressive case for tackling inflation against economic inequality, but it's sometimes if they're kind of consistently trying to find the consensus, but they're kind of a little bit behind the curve here, do they ever finally actually get above the curve? And it's just a challenge of can there be a soft landing? But I think there's still Powell, he will be confirmed again for a new term with broad bipartisan support. And so he has a lot of confidence in DC. It's just the question is outside of DC, are they seeing something with less than rose-colored glasses that we see here?
And I just read an article on Barron's that was talking about Walmart's now offering $110,000 for, first-time truck drivers. And that's almost double what they were a few years ago. They were saying that's signs that the Fed is behind the curve. But they also admitted that truck drivers are massively underpaid for years. So I think we have this dynamic where, yes, the Fed is behind the curve. If we're creating 500,000 jobs and unemployment, well below 4%, we don't need to be at zero. On the flip side, the pandemic created a shift in terms of the power between, management and labor. And a lot of people now are realizing that they were underpaid, and we're going to have this I don't know how long it is, but a couple year equilibrium of that, and it's going to result in some higher prices and higher wages. But I think then we'll find our happy medium and kind of move on.
I hope you're right. I hope it has some smoothness to it. I mean, it hasn't been smooth yet. I mean, look. I mean, I'm a big fan of Jay Powell's, and I want to see him confirmed. And Ben's right; he is going to be confirmed and pretty easily. And I think something about him is his sincerity, right? And he has a sort of a transparent nature to him. And so I think that's his, I think that's his super top power, right? In Washington, is that he's just pretty sincere. He tells you what he's seeing, and he has changed his mind and changed his outlook from meeting to meeting when he sees different things. And I think in a way in Washington, that's kind of endearing. I think that's one of the reasons why.
Yeah. I think you guys make a really it's a really interesting insight, because Jay is not an econometrician. He was a lawyer from background. He can do all the economic analysis. We all can, but I think because he didn't have that basically quantitative basis coming up, he doesn't get caught up in his models, that his models is always right and go too far one way or the other. When things change, Jay, more so than I think any Fed chair we've had for a while, is willing to admit it and just change.
Yeah. And that said, though, it cannot be denied. And we said it here before. It's self-evident that the Fed has failed in this.
Yes.
It has, right. I mean, it's axiomatic. I mean, their mandate is price stability, and inflation has exceeded.
Yeah,
they
were wrong about the
range of their expectations. So the Fed has, in fact, failed in that, but it was I think it was with right reasons and reasonable considerations. And I think their path back is credible. And I actually think people see it that way.
The game's not over. We're still battling. It can be won.
Yeah. Brendan, what are we looking at next week?
It's actually a fairly busy week. So the Bank of Canada and the ECB have interest rate meetings. And then we have both the producer price index, which has become much more important in terms of an economic data point than in the past, and also the consumer price index. And then always one of the big ones is the retail sales. So it's going to be a busy week.
Yeah, some big numbers there for sure. Well, a lot less for us to talk about next week. Ben Koltun from Beacon Policy Advisors, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for the update on reconciliation, the long saga of reconciliation. Let's have you back one of these days.
Love to.
Brendan, have a great weekend, man. Let's
you too.
Let's hope for some exciting outcomes at the Masters to talk about.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks for joining us on the Macrocast. We'll catch you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Macrocast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and share.